They thought it was just another interstellar object, silent, cold, and passing. But when 3I Atlas took not one, not two, but 3 massive impacts, what followed broke every model NASA had ever trusted. If you're ready to hear what really happened out there, stay with me and make sure you're subscribed, because what you're about to hear will change how you see the universe forever. Fade in. The calm before everything changed. In the dark silence beyond Mars's orbit, the James Webb Space Telescope had been tracking something unusual, a faint reflection moving in a way that didn't match the data. The object wasn't behaving like a comet, nor like any asteroid ever catalogued. For weeks, its path remained perfectly stable, until the moment it didn't. At 2:46 a.m., UTC sensors recorded the first collision. Not a random impact, but something direct. A burst of light, lasting 0.8 seconds, brighter than anything else in that region of space. Then, silence again. No debris cloud, no fragments, no thermal flare. Just a brief flash, as if something massive had struck it, and the object absorbed it completely. At NASA's Deep Space Network, engineers stared at the data in disbelief. "That's not dust impact behavior," one analyst muttered. "Normally, a hit like that would scatter ice and rock across kilometers." But 3I Atlas remained whole and still moving. Then came the second hit precisely 41 minutes later. Same pattern, same frequency burst. The energy signature was nearly identical, like a repeated experiment rather than a random strike. This time, telescopes detected something stranger. After the light faded, a faint ripple appeared around the object, a distortion in the surrounding plasma field, as if something was reacting to the energy instead of being destroyed by it. By now, NASA wasn't the only one watching. ESA's Gaia Observatory, India's Astrosat, and China's Fast Array had all picked up electromagnetic anomalies in the same band. All eyes turned toward this one silent traveler. A fragment from another star system, 3I Atlas had already defied expectations once. Now it was rewriting the rulebook again. When the third hit came, it didn't just flash. It echoed across deep space. A pulse rippled outward, low frequency, structured, and timed. It wasn't natural. It wasn't random. And the strangest part? The pulse wasn't just moving away from the object. It was moving towards something specifically. Jupiter. NASA's internal message thread from that night leaked weeks later. One line stood out among the noise. "Is greater than we think Atlas just signaled." Of course, officially, NASA never confirmed that statement. But the data speaks for itself. 3 impacts, identical bursts, identical timing, and a repeating pulse pattern that matched deep space communication harmonics. Something hit 3I Atlas 3 times. And instead of breaking apart, it spoke back. For the next 72 hours, the object's surface began to change. The Webb telescope recorded a faint luminous grid pattern spreading across its hull, thin, symmetrical lines that shimmered and then vanished. Spectrographic readings showed traces of magnesium silicate, titanium oxide, and something else, an unknown crystalline compound that reflected light unlike any known material. It wasn't natural erosion. It looked engineered. And that was when the first theory emerged. that the impacts weren't collisions at all. They were activations. Something inside 3I Atlas was waking up. But waking up to what? NASA called an emergency roundtable, unplanned, off the book. Only 12 scientists were invited, all sworn under NDA. Data packets from Webb, Gaia, and Hubble's deep tracking archives were brought together in one encrypted system. At first, the results seemed random, just radiation noise, charged particles, and field anomalies. But when aligned chronologically, a sequence began to form. Not just a pulse, a pattern, a rhythm that repeated every 241 seconds, precise down to the millisecond. Something that, to the human ear, almost sounded like breathing. The room went silent when one of the analysts overlaid the signal against cosmic background radiation. The frequency matched a section of the early universe's hydrogen map, but inverted, like a reflection of time itself. If the data was correct, 3I Atlas wasn't just sending out random frequencies. It was communicating in physics itself, encoding its message in the fundamental vibrations of the universe. Whatever struck 3I Atlas had awakened something ancient, something that now had our full attention. That was only the beginning. In the next part, NASA would discover what those 3 hits actually came from and why they may not have been natural impacts at all. Stay with me. The deeper this story goes, the stranger it gets. For 3 days after the triple impact, 3I Atlas drifted in near perfect silence. It didn't slow down. It didn't heat up. It didn't shed debris the way a normal comet would. But its signature, the invisible fingerprint it left in space, had changed completely. NASA's infrared data showed a pattern that shouldn't exist. It was as if the object had suddenly gained mass, then lost it again within seconds. The readings oscillated, flickering like a heartbeat. And every time the pulse rose, the space around it shimmered with faint distortions, almost like heat waves bending light. Except there was no heat. No visible energy source at all. The most chilling discovery came from the James Webb Space Telescope. Webb's deep field camera picked up faint arcs of reflected light around 3I Atlas, 3 expanding rings moving outward at thousands of kilometers per second. They weren't explosions. They were shock fronts, perfectly spherical, each matching the time of the 3 impacts. And each was mathematically uniform, like someone or something had engineered them to travel outward in silence. When the data arrived at the Goddard Space Flight Center, analysts tried to replicate the readings using simulation models. But none of them made sense. One senior astrophysicist summarized the entire event in a single line. Is greater than we're watching an object that reacts like it's alive. The second phase of observation began Operation Glass Halo. It wasn't a public mission. In fact, it was never supposed to be known at all. Using coordinated orbital assets from NASA, ESA, and the Japanese space agency JAXA, a full-spectrum scan of 3I Atlas was ordered. They wanted to know what exactly hit this thing. The first clue came from gravitational lensing, the way massive objects bend light around them. When scientists compared the light distortion before and after the impacts, they noticed something extraordinary. 3 small distortions appeared trailing 3I Atlas like invisible satellites, moving at the exact same velocity, They were small, maybe 100 meters wide each, but their energy profiles were off the chart. At first, they thought it was debris, but debris doesn't maintain formation. Debris doesn't keep a fixed distance from the object that supposedly ejected it. And debris certainly doesn't emit periodic bursts of radiation timed down to 1,000th of a second. The conclusion was simple and terrifying. The hits weren't impacts at all. They were contacts. 3 unknown bodies had made direct, controlled contact with 3I Atlas, and now they were following it, like escorts. By the 4th day, a new kind of signal emerged. A whisper. That's what they called it, the whisper signal. It wasn't radio, or light, or any known form of communication. It came through magnetic interference itself. Every time a solar flare swept through the area, the pattern strengthened as if the signal used the sun's chaos to amplify itself. At first, the whisper was pure noise, but after filtering it through signal analysis software, engineers noticed tiny fluctuations repeating at precise intervals. When converted into an audio spectrum, the signal produced a faint oscillation, a rhythmic hum, like a sustained note from an instrument far beyond human hearing. And beneath that hum, deep within the data, there were breaks, short silences that followed a fixed mathematical ratio. The golden ratio. That's what sent the scientists over the edge. Because in nature, the golden ratio appears everywhere. Spiral galaxies, seashells, hurricanes, even DNA. But in communication signals, never. Unless it's intentional. As the hum continued, something else happened. 3I Atlas began to spin. Not randomly, its rotation shifted into a perfect alignment with the sun's magnetic field. The 3 smaller bodies orbiting it adjusted too, forming a precise triangular formation, one pointing toward Mars, another toward Jupiter, and the third toward deep space. NASA's tracking software started to glitch. Every few hours, the signal caused the telescopic alignment to freeze for a fraction of a second, as though the data feed itself was being interrupted. The team rebooted multiple times. But the interference always came back. Finally, one technician noticed something horrifying. The moment the cameras froze, the data on the screen didn't just stop, it changed. Pixel by pixel, the static noise formed shapes. Letters, then numbers, and when slowed down, the code revealed coordinates. Not random space coordinates, but Earth-based ones. The location pointed to a remote point in the Pacific Ocean, near the Tonga Trench, an area over 10 kilometers deep, one of the least explored places on Earth. That's when NASA decided to stop releasing all public data related to 3I Atlas. Everything after that point became classified. Still, leaks began to surface online. Amateur astronomers with high-power telescopes began capturing strange lens flares when tracking the same region. Patterns that shouldn't appear unless there was an artificial reflection. It was as though something invisible, massive, was projecting signals directly into Earth's upper atmosphere. And then, one night, the Arecibo successor array in Puerto Rico detected a brief but unmistakable echo. It wasn't a transmission from Earth. It was a reflection coming from the direction of the Tonga coordinates. It looked like the signal from 3I Atlas had been answered. At that point, NASA went silent. For weeks, nothing came out of their deep space communication networks. But those monitoring global satellite relays noticed something else. An encrypted frequency, usually reserved for solar storm data, began pinging every 24 hours, always at the same minute, the same second. And if you mapped those pings over the course of a month, they traced a line, a direct connection between 3I Atlas and Earth. But the real shock came later, because what happened next couldn't be denied, and it wasn't hidden behind classified firewalls. The world saw it live in the night sky. On November 19th, 2025, 3I Atlas began to flare, a slow, pulsing glow that expanded and contracted like a living heart. And then, in the final frame Webb captured before its sensors overloaded, something seemed to open, a hollow void, like a dark eye, right at the object's core. The hits weren't the end. They were the beginning of a transformation, and the world had just witnessed its first heartbeat. By the time the glow faded, 3I Atlas had changed completely. Its once frozen surface was now alive, with motion-thin, luminous veins crawling across the hull like liquid fire. The object no longer looked like a comet. It looked engineered, symmetrical, structured, deliberate, and even more unsettling. Every shift in brightness matched a repeating sequence, 3 short pulses, 1 long. The same rhythm that had echoed through the deep space signal. NASA's control room grew quiet. They had seen pulses before, stars, quasars, magnetars, but nothing like this. This wasn't radiation decay or solar reflection. This was communication through light. Dr. Eleanor Voss, one of Webb's lead astrophysicists, replayed the footage dozens of times. Each pulse pattern seemed to follow a ratio 3 flashes, then a longer surge that lasted exactly 8.6 seconds, repeating every 241 seconds. That number rang alarms. It matched the frequency pattern recorded days earlier after the third hit, the same signal that had carried coordinates toward Earth. On the 7th day after the impacts, NASA authorized what they called Project Echo. Its goal? To answer the light. Using the Goldstone deep space antenna, they transmitted a series of binary pulses mimicking the 3I Atlas sequence. 1 hour passed. Then 2. No response. But precisely 8 hours and 42 minutes later, a faint light returned, not from 3I Atlas itself, but from one of the 3 smaller escort bodies trailing it. The response wasn't identical, it was mirrored, like a reflection of the original code. And when translated to an acoustic model, it formed a pattern identical to heartbeat arrhythmia. Is greater than. If that's coincidence, Dr. Voss whispered, then the universe just learned to joke. What happened next rippled across every observatory on Earth. For the first time, radio silence broke. The Deep Space Network received a narrow band transmission centered between the microwave and infrared spectrum, a frequency no natural process could maintain. It was faint, but structured, pulsing with clear harmonic intervals. When the data was processed, the signal revealed something impossible. A 3-dimensional waveform, mapped through time, that formed a shape, a sphere inside a cube, and within the sphere 3 dots, a perfect replica of 3I Atlas and its mysterious companions. The message seemed simple, but its precision terrified the analysts. It meant the sender wasn't random noise. It knew what it looked like. Publicly, NASA released nothing, but independent astronomers began to notice the same phenomenon. Anyone with a strong enough infrared telescope could see the pulses faint, rhythmic, steady, stretching across the sky like cosmic Morse code. Forums lit up overnight. Speculation exploded. Is it calling something? Is it charging? Or is it alive? Meanwhile, government observatories quietly repointed their arrays toward the object. A classified analysis revealed another discovery. 3I Atlas was no longer following its projected trajectory. It was drifting slightly away from its gravitational path. But it wasn't falling toward the sun or being pushed by solar radiation. It was changing course deliberately. At first, the shift was minor fractions of a degree. But within 48 hours, the deviation increased exponentially. By the time analysts ran the new trajectory, the data was chillingly precise. If the curve continued, 3I Atlas would perform a near-perfect gravitational slingshot around the Sun and exit on a vector leading straight toward Jupiter. The same destination predicted in several leaked mission forecasts weeks before. It looked intentional. And that raised a question no scientist wanted to voice out loud. Was 3I Atlas going home or following a route already planned? When Webb zoomed in for another scan, its sensors captured something that froze the entire team. For the first time ever, the telescope recorded faint arcs of matter leaving the object, thin streams of gas and microparticles arranged in perfect geometric spirals. Each spiral pulsed in sequence with the light rhythm, as though synchronized. Some described it as space breathing. Others said it looked like a machine venting energy. Spectrographic readings showed that the emitted material wasn't ice, dust, or rock. It was nickel alloy refined, magnetic, and unnaturally pure. The same kind of material used in high-efficiency spacecraft construction. It was as though the object was shedding armor. The escort bodies began to behave differently too. Their formation tightened. Instead of trailing, they moved alongside, aligning in a triangle around the object's equator. Each emitted a dim cyan glow with rapid flickers at the exact moments the pulses peaked. The triangular shape created interference patterns detectable even from Earth. Faint electromagnetic ripples spreading across space like the wake of a submerged craft. Dr. Voss called it an engine of silence. A system that didn't burn fuel or leave exhaust, it bent space itself. As days turned into weeks, the world's attention shifted from curiosity to fear. The phrase Atlas event began trending globally. News anchors whispered about alien probes, ancient signals, and hidden intentions. Governments denied everything. But leaked data told another story. Satellites monitoring near-Earth space had detected tiny timed radio echoes, each one precisely matching the Atlas pulse intervals originating not from deep space, but from Earth's atmosphere. Something down here was responding. When the next burst came, every observatory across 3 continents went blind for 6 seconds. The pulse wasn't light or radiation. It was gravitational. A sudden, invisible tremor that momentarily distorted satellite orbits and disrupted GPS across the Pacific. It lasted only moments. But the timing matched perfectly with 3I Atlas's latest pulse. And just before the distortion ended, The object flashed one last time, bright enough to outshine Jupiter itself for less than a second. Then the light vanished. No more pulses, no more escort signatures, just silence. For the next 48 hours, the world waited. Was it over? Had 3I Atlas finally burned out, or was it preparing for something bigger? The truth came from a source nobody expected, the Juno probe orbiting Jupiter. When its onboard cameras transmitted new images, one frame stood out among thousands. A faint silhouette approaching the gas giant. A dark, elongated object followed by 3 smaller shadows. It was still coming, still alive. And whatever had hit it 3 times before might not have been trying to destroy it. They might have been building it. Juno's transmission arrived, distorted its signal, half scrambled by Jupiter's intense radiation field. But what it captured, even in fragments, was enough to send shivers through every monitoring room on Earth. Through the haze of static and interference, analysts could make out the unmistakable silhouette of 3I Atlas, now drifting just above Jupiter's swirling cloud tops. Its motion was impossibly smooth, no wobble, no spin, no random drift, as if the planet's gravity didn't affect it at all. Normally, anything that close to Jupiter would be torn apart by tidal forces. Even the strongest alloys ever built by human hands would buckle. But Atlas floated there, motionless, steady, deliberate. And surrounding it, Jupiter's own magnetic field began to twist. At first, it looked like a glitch, field lines warping unnaturally, bending in directions that broke every model. Then, the distortion began to spin. A circular motion, a spiral forming at the edge of the Great Red Spot, one of the oldest storms in the solar system. For hours, the anomaly expanded until it stretched nearly 2,000 kilometers wide. Lightning danced across the vortex. Radiation spiked to levels so high that Juno's instruments automatically shut down to avoid destruction. But not before one final image was transmitted. A single frame, blurry, corrupted, yet unmistakable. Atlas was opening. From what scientists could reconstruct, panels along its midsection had shifted, not cracked or broken, but retracted. Inside, there was light, a bluish-white glow that pulsed rhythmically. Not fire, not plasma, but something colder, like liquid lightning trapped inside glass. It shimmered in patterns, expanding and contracting as if it were breathing. NASA engineers enhanced the image frame by frame, and one thing stood out. The light wasn't chaotic. It was structured. The glow formed thin filaments, weaving like circuitry, connecting one glowing chamber to another. It looked mechanical and alive. At that moment, Jupiter's entire magnetosphere pulsed an electromagnetic heartbeat that spread outward across millions of miles. Earth's deep space antennas picked up the wave 43 minutes later. And as it hit, instruments from Chile to Alaska registered simultaneous magnetic fluctuations. GPS systems wavered. Auroras appeared over the equator, and radio operators around the world began reporting strange interference. A faint rhythmic hum, 3 short tones, one long, over and over. The same pattern from 3I Atlas. By dawn the next day, every major agency was in lockdown. NASA, ESA, Roscosmos, CNSA, all communications encrypted. The public explanation was simple: solar storm activity. But internal data told a very different story. Jupiter's magnetosphere wasn't expanding randomly, it was responding to Atlas. Every few hours, new bursts of energy radiated from the planet's upper atmosphere in symmetrical waves. It was as if the gas giant itself was being used like an amplifier. Something was transmitting through it. At the center of it all, Atlas hovered calm, unshaken, immovable. Then, suddenly, a secondary signal appeared, faint but undeniable. It came from Jupiter's moon Ganymede, the largest in the solar system and the only one with its own magnetic field. For a brief 12 minutes, instruments registered synchronized pulses from both Atlas and Ganymede, perfect mirror patterns. Whatever Atlas was doing near Jupiter, it had just linked to a moon almost 1 million kilometers away. The data stream was chaotic, dense, and unreadable. But amid the noise, there was a single repeating data block, a numerical sequence repeating every 86 seconds. It wasn't random. When translated through binary compression, it formed coordinates, not of space, but of time. The timestamp pointed exactly 43 years into the past. October 15th, 1982. That's when Voyager 2 had passed Jupiter. And that's when one of its transmissions, a tiny fragment of unreadable code, had mysteriously corrupted. NASA had dismissed it back then as radiation damage. But now, that same pattern had reappeared, rewritten, refined, and sent back by Atlas. Dr. Voss was the first to connect the dots. Atlas wasn't just transmitting, it was responding to something we had sent decades ago. She pulled up old Voyager logs, comparing line by line, symbol by symbol, and there it was, in the middle of the garbled data, hidden deep in a corrupted file, a code fragment nearly identical to the one Atlas was now emitting. Her voice cracked when she said it aloud. Is greater than we talked to it first. The realization hit the world of science like a cold wave. If Atlas had received that signal in 1982, that meant it had been listening for over 40 years before revealing itself. And if it was listening, what else had it learned? The next few days were chaos. Leaked recordings from internal NASA briefings spread across the internet. Most were immediately discredited, labeled hoaxes. But one clip, allegedly from a secure conference call, captured something chilling. Is greater than Atlas energy signature is feeding off Jupiter's field. We think it's charging something. Charging. That was the word that terrified everyone. Because if the three impacts that started it all were activation points, if the light pulses were communication, and if Jupiter's magnetic energy was being drawn into whatever this structure was, then something was building. And when it finished charging, the world had no idea what would happen next. Meanwhile, amateur astronomers across the southern hemisphere began reporting strange glows near Jupiter's limb. Long, arching beams that reached outward into space before vanishing into darkness. They weren't meteors. They weren't auroras. They looked like bridges of light. A faint network, forming, expanding, pulsing, always in perfect rhythm with Atlas. No telescope could see where the beams ended, but one thing was certain: they weren't natural. NASA officially went dark the following day. Every live feed, every public data stream from Webb, Juno, and the Deep Space Network was cut off without explanation. Only a single statement appeared across NASA's social channels: is greater than temporary system maintenance. Data synchronization in progress. But by then, no one believed that anymore. People had already seen too much, and whispers began spreading, online whispers, that Atlas had changed direction again. This time, not away from Jupiter, but back toward the Sunday. And this time, it wasn't alone. The silence didn't last long. Within 2 days of NASA's blackout, the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, or SOHO, picked up a disturbance that couldn't be ignored. It came from deep within the Sun, a rhythmic vibration, faint but mathematically perfect, echoing through the corona. For the first time in recorded history, the Sun itself appeared to be resonating. At first, scientists thought it was a sensor, anomaly, cosmic interference, or an error in the magnetic flux readings. But then, the pattern stabilized. 3 short pulses, 1 long, the same pattern as 3I Atlas. It wasn't the Sun's usual chaotic turbulence. It was structured, timed, intelligent. When the data reached the Deep Space Network, the analysis was chillingly clear. The signal wasn't moving outward. It was moving inward, rippling toward the Sun's core. That meant something or someone was transmitting into the Sunday. By the time the first images came in from the solar orbiter, it was already too late to deny it. A faint arc of material was visible along the solar limb, almost invisible against the blinding light. It was a thin, luminous trail, the unmistakable iron signature of an interstellar object entering solar proximity. Atlas was returning, but this time it wasn't alone. Trailing behind it were 3 dim points of light, the same smaller bodies that had once followed in formation. Except now, they weren't behind. They had formed a perfect equilateral triangle around the Sun's equator, maintaining distance as if in orbit. The pattern was precise down to fractions of a degree, like something constructing a network. NASA's Emergency Task Group, now working under a joint directive with the European Space Agency, began cross-referencing the new trajectory data. Every simulation pointed to the same outcome. 3I Atlas was entering what's known as a gravity lock, a rare orbital resonance that could keep it perfectly balanced between the Sun's pull and Jupiter's influence. That shouldn't be possible for an object its size. Natural bodies can't hold that kind of balance, but engineered ones can. As Atlas approached the Sun, its luminosity began to increase again, the same pulsing heart-like rhythm captured weeks before. Except this time, the pulses grew stronger, faster, synchronized with the Sun's internal oscillations. The Sun was answering back. For the first time ever, NASA's solar acoustic data began to harmonize with the pulse frequency. It was as if the Sun's magnetic field and Atlas's output were tuning to the same pitch, like 2 instruments aligning perfectly across the void. At the center of the disturbance, magnetic lines bent inward, twisting into massive spirals of plasma, tens of thousands of kilometers long. Every telescope aimed at the Sun showed the same thing. 3 spirals, 1 large, 2 smaller, rotating in perfect sync. The configuration was identical to the pattern Atlas had displayed around Jupiter. Coincidence was no longer on the table. As the resonance grew, a faint electromagnetic field enveloped the entire solar equator. Radiation readings spiked. Solar flares intensified, not random explosions, but timed releases. Each flare burst in intervals of 8 minutes and 36 seconds, precisely matching the pulse sequence of Atlas's energy cycles. It was now undeniable. Atlas wasn't being pulled by the sun, it was communicating with it. And whatever conversation was happening, it wasn't just between two celestial bodies. It was being broadcast across the solar system. Deep space monitoring stations in Chile, Australia, and South Africa all picked up the same repeating sub-frequency buried beneath the flare data. When visualized through spectrograms, it formed something eerie, a spiral identical to the one carved in ancient Peruvian stone petroglyphs thousands of years ago. A perfect golden ratio. Someone or something was speaking a language older than civilization itself. Then, something even stranger happened. For 43 minutes, all solar observation satellites went dark. Every one of them, from the Parker Solar Probe to Solar Orbiter to Japan's Hinode mission, their sensors overloaded simultaneously, registering the same data spike, a single burst of infrared energy unlike anything ever recorded. It wasn't destructive. It wasn't random. It was a pulse of precision. And when reconstructed in 3 dimensions, it formed a shape, a spiral sphere rotating counter to the sun's rotation. Inside it, faintly visible, was a dark void, a circular shadow matching Atlas's exact profile. Dr. Voss, reviewing the data from her home terminal late that night, noticed something no one else had. Each new pulse had a timestamp embedded within its radio echo, the same number sequence every time. The 29th of October 2025. October 29th. The day of Atlas' solar approach. The timestamp wasn't a record. It was a countdown. As the date approached, everything changed. Solar winds intensified. The sun's corona shimmered with symmetrical ripples, light moving in waves so organized they looked like fingerprints. At night, even from Earth, people began to notice something different about sunlight itself. It flickered, subtly but unnaturally, as if filtered through a massive unseen lens. Astronomers across the world pointed their telescopes toward the sun, some out of fear, others out of fascination. And then, on the morning of October 29th, 2025, at exactly 11:11 UTC, something extraordinary occurred. For 6 minutes, the sun stopped. Not physically, but electromagnetically. Its magnetic field ceased fluctuating. Solar wind halted. Every instrument across the solar system flatlined. And in that absolute stillness, a single transmission was detected. It wasn't from Atlas. It was from the sun itself. The signal was clear. Encoded light. A structured burst of photons that repeated 3 times. When translated into binary and mapped into frequency space, it revealed a perfect image. A spiral, a circle, and in the center a shape unmistakably similar to Earth. But that wasn't the most chilling part. The spiral wasn't expanding outward, it was contracting inward. and the final frame showed the pattern converging directly toward our planet. At that moment, all three of Atlas's smaller companions flared to life. Bright as new stars, they broke formation and accelerated along separate trajectories, one toward Mars, one toward Venus, and one toward Earth. They weren't drifting anymore. They were coming. And in the final transmission, before the signal cut, Webb captured the central body of Atlas folding in on itself like a flower closing in slow motion. Its outer shell collapsed inward light, vanishing until all that remained was a perfect black sphere reflecting nothing. It was no longer transmitting, no longer pulsing, just waiting. For nearly 12 hours, Earth's night sky was quiet. Too quiet? No new flares from the Sunday. No signals from Atlas. No trace of the three smaller companions that had broken formation. Then, just after midnight, UTC telescopes across the world began reporting faint, coordinated flashes, brief, shimmering arcs of light crossing the upper atmosphere like inverted shooting stars. They weren't entering from random directions. All three came from the same vector, the ecliptic plane. That meant only one thing. They weren't debris. They were arrivals. The first detection came from the Arecibo radar array before it went dark again. The readings showed three separate objects entering Earth's orbital field, each approximately 160 meters in diameter, matching the last known dimensions of the Atlas escorts. But the part that made no sense, their velocity. They weren't speeding up, they were slowing down. Objects entering Earth's gravity well should accelerate, not decelerate. To maintain that kind of control, they would need propulsion power equivalent to multiple nuclear reactors. But radar showed no exhaust, no heat, no trace of radiation, just perfect, silent movement. The first object Alpha, positioned itself over the South Pacific, holding a steady altitude of about 80 kilometers. The second object Beta hovered above the Arctic Circle, directly between Greenland and Siberia, and the third object Gamma moved into geosynchronous orbit directly above the equator, right over the Indian Ocean. Within minutes, every nation capable of tracking space activity was watching. At first, their movements seemed static. But then, one by one, the three objects began to emit faint rings of electromagnetic interference, low-frequency waves sweeping across the planet. Every broadcast station, satellite uplink, and shortwave radio on Earth caught it. The signal was the same across every device. 3 short pulses, 1 long. Atlas's language had returned. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Dr. Elena Voss and her exhausted team gathered around the analysis terminal. This time, the pulses weren't identical to the ones from deep space. Each of the 3 objects emitted variations, tiny deviations in rhythm, almost like different instruments playing in the same key. When combined, the signals formed a unified waveform. And when they mapped the data in 3-dimensional frequency space, it created a holographic pattern, a perfectly rotating sphere surrounded by 3 orbiting points. It was Atlas structure, recreated now in orbit around Earth. But that wasn't all. Hidden inside the core of the frequency was something no one expected, a waveform that matched Earth's Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic heartbeat of the planet. Atlas wasn't just communicating to Earth anymore, it was communicating with it. Across the globe, strange phenomena began. compass readings drifted erratically for hours. Bird migrations went off course. Whales began beaching themselves in unprecedented numbers. And people everywhere started reporting the same unsettling effect, a low hum. Some could hear it faintly at night, a droning vibration that seemed to come from the ground itself. At first, governments denied it. Then, recordings started spreading online. Amateur radio operators discovered that when the hum was filtered through audio analysis software, it wasn't random noise, it was a pattern. 3 short, 1 long. While the public debated conspiracies, NASA quietly initiated Protocol Horizon, a classified communication project using the Deep Space Network's Goldstone antenna array. The mission was simple: respond to the pulse in Atlas' own language, using electromagnetic amplitude instead of light. They broadcast the pattern at full power, embedding within it a human-made identifier, the binary representation of hydrogen and oxygen, the basic elements of water, life's universal symbol. The signal went out, and for 7 full hours, the world waited. Then, one by one, the 3 orbiting objects responded, their pulses synchronized perfectly, aligning with Earth's own magnetic field in resonance. And for a single moment, barely measurable Earth's magnetic shield intensified by 0.3%, as though the planet itself had flinched. Then came the light. A sudden, silent flare erupted from Object Gamma above the Indian Ocean. It wasn't an explosion. It was a projection, a thin, vertical beam piercing downward toward the upper atmosphere, expanding into a wide ring of light. The ring stabilized, rotating slowly, displaying something inside. Not an image, but a structure. Observers across Asia saw it first. A vast, ghostly pattern glowing faintly in the sky, concentric circles and triangles rotating within each other like gears of light. Radar couldn't detect it. Cameras could barely capture it. But every human eye that looked up saw the same thing. A design, mathematical, intentional. Dr. Voss realized what they were seeing wasn't projected onto the atmosphere, it was forming within it. The light interacted with charged particles, reshaping the ionosphere itself. Atlas wasn't sending a message. It was scanning. The realization struck hard. Each of the 3 objects wasn't an observer, they were triangulating something, using the planet itself as a reflective surface, as if Earth were a mirror. For the next several hours, global power grids flickered intermittently. GPS readings warped. Even high-frequency stock market servers recorded millisecond distortions in data transmission. Something was subtly rewriting the electromagnetic fabric of the planet and doing it so precisely that not a single system fully collapsed. It wasn't attack, it was calibration. By the 5th hour of the phenomenon, the auroras returned, but not just at the poles. For the first time in human history, auroras appeared simultaneously around the entire planet, a ring of color stretching from horizon to horizon. Green, violet, and deep crimson waves cascaded across the night sky, swirling into a spiral centered directly above the Indian Ocean. At the exact center of that spiral, Object Gamma remained unmoving, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. Satellite footage from the International Space Station showed something breathtaking. Within the auroral spiral, faint shadows began forming vast circular patterns moving beneath the clouds. They weren't shadows of the objects above, but reflections from something far larger, invisible, hovering beyond visible range. It was as if the three smaller crafts were mapping or revealing a colossal structure hidden just beyond human perception, something that had been there all along, cloaked within the fabric of space. One analyst whispered the thought that no one wanted to say aloud, is greater than, what if Atlas isn't here to visit us? What if it's here to wake something up? Within hours of the global auroral event, everything changed. From the deserts of Namibia to the frozen plains of Alaska, the night sky carried the same strange symmetry, a spiral of light stretching horizon to horizon, like the planet itself had been wrapped in a living veil. Even during daylight, faint threads of iridescence hung in the upper atmosphere, shimmering like oil on water. The air itself seemed different, thicker, charged, as if the whole planet were breathing in sync with something unseen above. And it was. Every 8 minutes and 36 seconds, the global magnetic field pulsed. Not from solar interference or geomagnetic storms. This was artificial engineered. The pulse was clean, rhythmic, mathematical, and it was spreading. NASA's data visualization systems began to map the wave patterns in real time. What they found made no sense. The pulses weren't random or global, they were moving in arcs, tracing paths along the Earth's magnetic ley lines, the ancient invisible routes once dismissed as myth. Each wave intersected at key points, the poles, the equator, and several geologic fault zones forming a massive electromagnetic lattice around the planet. To the untrained eye, it looked like a storm. To Dr. Elena Voss, it looked like construction. She called it a planetary circuit. The 3 Atlas fragments continued their silent orbit, each now emitting a faint halo of light that extended hundreds of kilometers across. From space, they looked like small suns, white-blue rings surrounding Earth like sentinels. But telescopic imagery showed the truth. Each one had opened. Sections of their outer hull had retracted, revealing vast internal chambers that flickered with electrical storms, plasma arcs spiraling through their interiors like veins of lightning. They weren't ships anymore. They were machines at work, and the planet was their project. For the first time since the phenomenon began, NASA broke silence. An encrypted press briefing leaked online, showing fragments of their internal simulations. It showed what the electromagnetic pulses were doing. The resonance pattern was reshaping the Earth's ionosphere, bending high-altitude plasma currents into symmetrical orbits. Essentially, Atlas was terraforming, the magnetosphere itself tuning Earth's magnetic frequency to match a larger, unknown source. The planet wasn't being attacked. It was being prepared. Meanwhile, civilian electronics around the world started failing in strange and specific ways. Not crashing, not shutting down, simply freezing, all at once, for exactly 8.36 seconds before resuming as if nothing happened. Phones, aircraft instruments, deep-sea sensors, everything synchronized with the pulse. In some parts of the world, people began hearing faint whispers over dead radio channels, digital echoes that, when slowed down, contained fragments of human speech. One of the clearer decoded lines was captured by a ham operator in northern Finland. Is greater than calibration, 97% complete. As panic grew, governments issued familiar reassurances. No cause for alarm. But then came the photographs. astronauts aboard the International Space Station reported seeing what looked like massive geometric shadows far below the cloud layer, visible only when the aurora flared at maximum brightness. They weren't random shapes, they were perfect hexagons and circles, arranged in vast spirals across the ocean. Each one spanned hundreds of kilometers, and every single one was aligned perfectly to the energy nodes of the electromagnetic lattice that Atlas had built. In the following hours, something subtle but undeniable began happening to the oceans. Radar buoys from the Pacific and Indian Oceans recorded slight oscillations, millimeters at first, then centimeters. The sea wasn't rising or falling. It was vibrating. The frequency matched the electromagnetic pulse from the Atlas network, and when mapped across global ocean data, the vibrations aligned into a massive standing wave pattern, a single planetary resonance centered precisely at the equator. It was as though the entire Earth had become one instrument, and something was slowly tuning it to pitch. Back at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Dr. Voss watched the new data come in an overlay of magnetosphere, oceanic pressure, and ionospheric density. When combined, they formed something impossible. A three-dimensional shape wrapped around the Earth. Not random, not chaotic, a structure. It looked like a sphere made of light, spinning slowly around the planet, intersecting at the poles. When they ran it through rotation analysis, the structure matched a pattern they had seen before the inner geometry of 3I Atlas itself. The revelation hit like ice water. Atlas wasn't just around the Earth. It was replicating itself through it. Outside, people began noticing another change. The stars were fading, not from clouds or pollution, but from something else, a thin, luminous haze that spread across the night sky, reflecting faint, shifting colors. To the naked eye, it looked like a veil. To telescopes, it was a field, a translucent barrier forming at the edge of Earth's upper atmosphere. Light from distant stars began refracting oddly through it, bending into faint rings. Radio waves bounced differently. Satellite transmissions started arriving 0.03 seconds faster than they should. Time itself was warping not noticeably to humans, but enough that instruments felt it. Dr. Voss stood before her exhausted team and said the words that would later be redacted from every transcript. Is greater than, it's building something bigger than we can measure, and we're standing inside it. Her team ran one last simulation, projecting what would happen if the frequency continued to rise at its current rate. The result was stunning and terrifying. At 100% synchronization, Earth's magnetosphere would no longer deflect solar radiation. It would absorb it. In other words, the planet would become part of the system, a node in a galactic network powered by the sun itself. Meanwhile, the sun, silent for days, pulsed once more. A faint burst of energy rippled through space, passing Jupiter, Mars, and then finally reaching Earth's new magnetic lattice. The entire planet glowed for a fraction of a second, just long enough for satellites to record the pattern forming at the center of the auroral spiral. It wasn't random static. It was an image. A dark, circular shape surrounded by concentric light, the unmistakable outline of 3I Atlas. And this time, it wasn't approaching. It was activating. It started with light. Not the ordinary kind, not sunrise or fire, not even the raw brilliance of solar flares. This light was different. It had structure, It bent. It moved like it knew where it wanted to go. At 4:13 UTC, all major power grids across the planet recorded a simultaneous surge, brief, precise, and synchronized to the same rhythm as the 3I Atlas pulse. The increase wasn't destructive, but every electrical device flickered, lights dimmed, screens glowed white for half a second, then returned to normal. To most, it was just a glitch. To NASA, it was confirmation. The lattice had gone active. The electromagnetic field surrounding Earth was no longer passive. It was drawing in solar energy, absorbing the solar wind instead of repelling it. For the first time in history, Earth's magnetic field had become a conduit. Dr. Voss's team at JPL watched in disbelief as the magnetosphere data rendered across their screens. The once chaotic streams of charged particles now flowed smoothly into perfectly symmetrical arcs. It was like watching a living system take shape. The auroras pulsed in unison with the solar radiation, channeling it into the planet itself. The Earth was humming. The hum grew. By 8 UTC, sensitive microphones, placed deep in geological vaults meant to measure seismic activity, began picking up a low, continuous tone at 7.83 Hz. That was the Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic frequency of the Earth. But now, it had harmonics, new layers, frequencies that had never existed before. It was as if something was layering code into the planet's frequency itself, rewriting its electromagnetic DNA. Dr. Voss whispered under her breath, "Is greater than, it's not just building, it's programming." Then came the first visual anomaly. Above the South Atlantic, satellites recorded a massive circular distortion expanding through the upper atmosphere. At first, scientists thought it was a magnetospheric bubble, a harmless plasma fluctuation. But as it stabilized, it revealed something haunting, a dark disk, perfectly black, absorbing all surrounding light. It wasn't solid, it was absence, an optical void. Every light particle, every radio wave that touched it, vanished instantly. It was as though reality itself refused to exist inside that circle. NASA called it the shadow zone. The formation grew with each pulse of the Atlas lattice. And soon, new ones began appearing smaller, rotating patterns forming over the equator, the poles, and near the Indian Ocean, where object Gamma remained in stationary orbit. Together, they created a geometric web of shadows, gateways of darkness, suspended within the bright auroral glow. But then, something happened that no one could explain. Within each shadow, faint light began to shimmer, not reflected light, but stars. The shadows weren't empty. They were windows. What they showed was not familiar. Through the dark disks, telescopes captured brief glimpses of sky constellations that didn't match any known celestial coordinates. Galaxies arranged in patterns impossible from Earth's perspective. One even showed a massive, glowing sphere that mirrored Atlas design, exactly orbiting another star system. It was as if the voids were connecting to distant regions of space, or perhaps parallel versions of it. The concept was beyond physics. It was something else entirely. For days, people across the world watched the strange auroras and the shimmering voids, unaware that the planet itself was changing beneath their feet. Magnetometers recorded steady increases in field intensity. The compass drift had returned, more violent now, and deep underground, near the Earth's core, seismic detectors picked up vibrations not from tectonic plates, but from the magnetic core itself. The planet's rotation slowed by 0.003 seconds, barely measurable, but enough for atomic clocks to detect it. Whatever Atlas had begun, it was affecting time. Dr. Voss convened a private conference with ESA, JAXA, and the United Nations Space Council. She presented a single image, a composite of the electromagnetic readings and the atmospheric lattice model. When rendered together, it revealed something breathtaking. The entire magnetic structure, all the light arcs and energy nodes aligned into a spiral. A golden ratio pattern stretching from the North Pole to the South, wrapping the planet in perfect mathematical symmetry. At the very center of that spiral, precisely mapped, was Earth's core. Is greater than, it's not targeting the surface, she said quietly. It's aligning with the heart of the planet. Soon after, satellites monitoring solar radiation reported a disturbing change. The sun's corona, normally chaotic and explosive, had formed a single perfect circular loop. It wasn't natural, and through that loop, streams of plasma began funneling directly toward Earth's orbit, not in random bursts, but in a continuous, stable arc. It was a connection, a bridge between the sun and the planet. Atlas had turned Earth into a solar node, a receiver. As the plasma flow intensified, so did the auroras. They no longer appeared as waves of color. They formed intricate patterns, symbols even, circles within circles, glowing in spectral light. Astronomers began cataloguing the shapes and noticed something strange. The symbols weren't random. They matched geometric patterns found on ancient ruins across Earth, Sumerian spirals, Mayan solar glyphs, and even carvings on prehistoric stones in Siberia and Peru. It was as if the sky itself was rewriting the story of human origins in code. Then came the sound. At first, it was inaudible to most, just a vibration in the bones. But soon, people across continents began to hear it. A deep, harmonic tone, faint but persistent. It resonated through walls, mountains, even oceans. Some said it felt like the earth was singing. Others said it felt like a warning. On the fifth day, all three Atlas fragments aligned perfectly, one over the poles, one above the equator, and one hovering near the Atlantic lattice node. At that precise moment, the hum grew louder, and then silence. Complete global silence. No wind, no birds, no movement. Even the oceans seemed frozen. It was as if the world was holding its breath. And then from deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, a single beam of blue light erupted straight upward, piercing the atmosphere and reaching into space. Every satellite caught it. The beam passed directly through the Atlas lattice and connected with the sun's plasma arc. For a brief, impossible moment, Earth and the sun became one continuous circuit. In that instant, every human heartbeat synchronized. Sensors in hospitals across the planet recorded a simultaneous drop 0.2 beats per minute, in perfect sync with the planetary pulse. No matter who you were, where you were, your body moved to the same rhythm. The world had become a single living organism, and somewhere In the darkness beyond the solar system, 3I Atlas pulsed once more stronger, brighter than ever. Its message, when decoded through the returning signal, was simple. Only 3 words. Transmission complete, awaiting return. At first, nothing happened. The beam between the Earth and the Sun stayed stable, silent, unwavering, like a pillar of frozen lightning cutting through the void. From orbit, it looked impossibly beautiful, a luminous bridge of white gold plasma, shimmering with spectral colors that no camera could fully capture. But then came the change, subtle yet undeniable. The color shifted from gold to deep blue, then from blue to violet, and then, finally, to black. The light didn't fade, it inverted. It was as if the beam had become a tunnel, a corridor of darkness drawing in light instead of emitting it. And as it did, the sun itself began to dim. Across every observatory on Earth, scientists watched as solar readings plunged. Radiation levels dropped by 0.3%, then 0.8%, then a full 1.4%. It wasn't a solar minimum, it was absorption. The Atlas lattice was no longer just drawing solar energy. It was consuming it. The sun was bleeding light directly into Earth's magnetic field. The oceans began to react almost instantly. Tides shifted out of rhythm. Currents reversed flow in the Indian Ocean, forming massive, slow-moving spirals that defied gravity. And beneath the surface, deep-sea sensors near the Mariana Trench picked up something terrifying: heat. The abyss was warming. In less than 24 hours, the deep Pacific registered a 3.2 degrees Celsius increase in temperature. No volcanoes, no seismic activity, just pure thermal energy rising from the planet's core. Dr. Voss's voice trembled as she stared at the new data. The heat wasn't random, it was concentrated, aligned precisely beneath the planetary lattice node. Whatever Atlas was doing, it was channeling power directly into the planet's interior. Is greater than, it's not extracting energy, she whispered. It's charging something. From the far side of the moon, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter captured something impossible. Faint arcs of plasma, the same blue-violet current, were wrapping around the Earth's magnetosphere, forming a vast spherical structure. To the naked eye, it appeared like a faint bubble of twilight around the planet. To instruments, it was a shell of pure energy. And then the readings came in the frequency of that shell, matched one thing perfectly: the pulse of 3I Atlas itself. Atlas was no longer just near Earth. It was inside Earth's electromagnetic field. The planet and the object had merged into one resonant system. For humanity, reality began to distort. In some regions, time slowed fractionally. Digital clocks desynchronized by milliseconds, then seconds. In others, gravitational readings fluctuated slightly, a sensation of lightness, as though the planet's mass had shifted. Skies turned darker, but more luminous at the same time, violet bands streaking across the horizon where sunlight met the lattice glow. The air shimmered faintly, alive with invisible motion. And then came the lights in the oceans. Hundreds of miles wide, faint geometric shapes began glowing beneath the water's surface. Hexagons, circles, spirals, glowing in deep ultramarine. The light pulsed upward through the waves, illuminating the clouds above in rhythmic flashes. Every pattern matched the internal structure of 3I Atlas. It was no longer just a visitor, it was replicating itself through the planet's energy grid. As night fell, the world's communication networks collapsed. Every frequency, radio, satellite, cellular, was overwhelmed by the same harmonic interference. Not static, not noise, but music, a deep, resonant chorus that defied linguistic interpretation. Billions of voices, human, mechanical, alien overlapping, merging into one continuous sound that seemed to come from every direction at once. For 7 full minutes, the earth sang. And during that time, every living creature, from whales in the ocean to birds in the air to humans on the ground, fell silent, instinctively, as if listening. When the hum ended, the world changed again. The dark beam between the sun and earth shimmered, then collapsed inward like water spiraling down an invisible drain. The light imploded silently, and then the atmosphere ignited with a blinding flash. For 0.8 seconds, the entire planet was bathed in ultraviolet light so intense that it left temporary shadows burnt into walls and landscape. Then stillness, no explosion, no destruction, just quiet. But in that quiet, something else appeared. High above the Earth, at the edge of the magnetosphere, telescopes recorded a massive distortion. The light-bent stars flickered, and then a shadow began to take shape. It wasn't a single ship. It wasn't even a fleet. It was something far larger. A structure so vast it filled an eighth of the night sky. Hexagonal segments connected by glowing arcs, moving with deliberate, mechanical precision. Its edges rippled with blue light, as if it were forming out of the fabric of space itself. 3I Atlas had arrived, not as an object, but as a gateway. From its center, the dark core began to open, not outward, but inward, folding space into itself like an endless mirror. Telescopes, observing the phenomenon, recorded multiple layers of reflection, stars, galaxies, and then something else. A faint, spherical mass hovering within the portal, impossibly far yet infinitely close. It looked like a planet, but its surface glowed with latticework identical to Earth's new magnetic pattern. It was Earth somewhere else. Or maybe Earth as it was meant to be. When dawn finally broke, the world looked the same, but somehow it didn't feel the same. The skies were clear, the oceans calm, but every sensor still whispered with faint magnetic static, a heartbeat that refused to fade. For those who were watching, there was one undeniable truth. Earth had crossed a threshold. No one could explain what truly happened to 3I Atlas. Some said it left behind a copy of us somewhere beyond the stars. Others believed we became that copy and that this version of Earth is the reflection. But one thing was certain, the signal never stopped. Every 8.36 seconds, deep space still echoed with that faint pulse like a reminder or a promise. Maybe Atlas wasn't just observing us. Maybe it was waiting. If you've listened this far, Remember, the universe doesn't reveal its secrets all at once. There's always another mystery unfolding beyond the edge of what we see. And this was only the beginning. Subscribe, stay curious, and watch the next story appearing on your screen right now. Because somewhere out there, another signal has already been detected.